CBSE Board, History, Chapter 8, Part 4, Audio by Rini Matthew. In the previous audio, we saw that there were certain ideals of womanhood which was expected to be followed in the Victorian era, and most of the women loved to follow it. We saw how they were expected to wear certain attire, the long frocks, the corset, the stay, the thin waist. And when do you call a woman ideal? When you are docile, submissive, subservient, and when you're ready to suffer pain. So, how did women react to these norms? Were they really happy? Did they react? Or did they just happily follow the rules and norms? Of course, many women believed in the ideals of womanhood. The ideals were in the air they breathed, the literature they read, the education they had received at school and at home. From childhood, they grew up believing two things. To believe that having a small waist was a womanly duty. Pain was essential to being a woman. So all these ideals of the womanhood was there in the air, which meant that whenever they went to any place, whether they read books, whether they discussed philosophy or sociology, even when they had pursued education, everything taught them to follow these ideals of womanhood. And we also saw that girls were groomed to follow these rules from a very early age. So they were trained to follow all these norms from a very early age. That is, to believe that having a small waist was like a duty. You have to have a very thin waist. Otherwise, you are not an ideal woman. And pain was essential to being a woman. Just suppress and take the pain was the ideal. All right? Okay. So what was not accepted? Not everyone accepted these values. Over the 19th century, ideas changed. And we saw that the 19th and the 20th centuries were very important to see how clothes transformed over the years. By the 1830s, women in England began agitating democratic rights. So by the 1830s, till then, they were ready to accept all these ideals. They were very happy to have these norms. And of course, they took a lot of time to be the ideal Victorian woman, which they read in literature, because those days the forms of entertainment was just writing and reading. And of course, discussing with your friends or family members. We never had, TV like how we have today. So these were the forms of entertainment where they always loved to be the ideal Victorian woman that they saw in education and literature. But by the 1830s, that is by the 19th century, ideas changed. When does an idea change? When do you actually protest? When do you want change? That is when you start thinking. When you start reflecting on what is happening, when you start questioning certain things, reforms come into being, transformation takes place, or you're sowing the seeds of transformation when you reflect, when you think back. So some women started protesting, they started reflecting, and they began showing signs for democratic rights. They wanted to fight for these democratic rights. So, of course, there were a few women who did not like these ideas and did not want to continue with the ideals of being a perfect Victorian woman. Women's magazines described how tight dresses and corsets caused deformities and illness among young girls. So, as I told you earlier, the corsets and the stays, it was not made of cloth initially. It's like there is a basic frame which is made of wood or a material which is similar to thick cardboard, because the body will have to fit into that frame to kind of squeeze the body. That is the idea which I would like to give you, and put the body into that particular frame so that you can wear the dress over it. So when the body is squeezed for a long time, you're wearing this dress for a long time, it of course caused deformities and problems It is a pressure on the body. It is not natural. So when you are forcing your body to act in a particular way for a long time, which is very unnatural, it will cause illness. So magazines started to get circulated, and there were a lot of health problems which the girls and women faced from a very young age. So that was brought into notice through these kind of magazines and circulated copies. Such clothing restricted body growth and hampered blood circulation. You never could go for the blood circulation. You never had proper blood circulation, which led to so many problems. And it also restricted body growth. Muscles remained underdeveloped and the spines got bent. Oh, very serious problem. Doctors reported that many women were regularly complaining of acute weakness, felt languid, and fainted frequently, because when your body is squeezed for a long time, remember that it is the chest part and the abdomen part which is getting squeezed. So definitely you'll fall ill, you will faint, you're very uncomfortable, and you will feel weak by the end of the day. Corsets then became necessary to hold up the weakened spine. So that is why you wore corset, and you will have a steel frame which is fixed to the corset so that you can hold the spine together. That was the main idea of having the corset. Otherwise, only stay was required. Okay, so these were some of the problems which kept on circulating in the women magazines, which did not encourage the use of these kind of dresses and the ideal principles of being a Victorian woman. So if you take a look at all the source boxes which is given in your textbook, you have the first box which discusses a problem, or it is giving an insight into how some people behaved during those times. So it is very interesting. Some facts are given. So the first box, Mary Somerville, one of the first women mathematicians, describes in her memoirs the experience of her childhood days. So it's like a diary or something where people record how they felt in their childhood days. Although perfectly straight and well made, I was encased in stiff ways with a steel busk in front. So when you look at the picture which is given on the right hand side of the screen, can you see a corset there? And in the center part, you have a pink shaded portion that is actually made of steel. This is a diagram which shows how the corset was designed. You have a steel frame in the middle, and that is something which held the body together. It was so stiff and you were not comfortable, and that is what Mary is trying to tell here. With a steel busk in front. So that pink color portion is known as the busk. It is usually made of metal or some kind of steel. While above my frock, bands drew my shoulder back until the shoulder blades met. So it was like tight and stiff, and maybe you felt the pain inside. Maybe you will have bruises when you wear these kind of materials. Then a steel rod with a semicircle which went under my chin was clasped to the steel busk in my stay. So look at the way you have the top part of that particular corset. Can you look into the diagram? You have something on top. So that was like a steel rod with a semicircle, and it went all the way to the chin. It was like a torture, right? In this constrained state, constrained, you were not allowed to move freely. You were having restrictions there also. I and most of the younger girls had to prepare our lesson. So you have to wear this dress for a long time, even when you are a small child. Even when you're going to school, you had to wear this and then prepare for your lessons. So probably the girls were waiting to just get back home and get back to their house dress instead of wearing it. So it was so tiresome to wear. We saw all the health problems. Not only health problems, even mentally you were weakened, right? So the source of this particular paragraph is from Martha Somerville, Personal Recollections from Early Life to Old Age of Mary Somerville. So somebody else has recorded the experience of another person. So something very informative on how they felt when they wore these kind of attires or frames. There's another box. Now you have the meaning of a word given there. Pub Hullum. That is how it is pronounced. Pabulum. It's a material for intellectual nourishment. So look at the box. Many government officials of the time were alarmed at the health implications of the prevailing styles of dressing amongst women. Consider the following attack on the corset. So many people were really concerned and even surprised by the health implications which was brought about by the doctors on the dressing. It is evident physiologically that air is a problem of life, and that the effect of a tight cord round the neck and of tight lacing differ only in degrees. For the strangulations are both fatal. To wear tight stays in many cases is to wither, to waste, to die. So they are talking about the way people felt inside that tight cord, restrained, constrained. You are strangled inside your dress. It's not just the question of being comfortable. You will hope that you don't wear anything when you have these kind of frames. So you have the source also given there. It is given in your textbook, the Registrar General in the 9th annual report. All right, so that is the next source. So please read these parts so that you get a better view of how the people thought and felt during those times. Next source. I told you that people who wrote in those times were very particular about writing women and how they were dressed and how they were supposed to look. You have a famous poet from English literature, John Keats. Do you know how the famous English poet John Keats described his ideal woman? He said she was like a milk-white lamb that bleats for man's protection. So even in Vanity Fair is a famous novel by Thackeray, described the charm of a woman character, Amelia, in these words. So I think it was her weakness which was her principal charm, a kind of sweet submission and softness, which seemed to appeal to each man she met for his sympathy and protection. So for sympathy and protection, you had to satisfy everybody around by being the ideal woman in Victorian times. So it was a kind of submission, sacrifice, and softness that the women had to depict, and it was a kind of pretension also. Don't you think so? Women were just pretending to be soft, and you have to be submissive. So recollect the ideal principles that the women had to follow: submissive, docile, fatigued, weak. All these key words are important when you write your long and short answers. Keep that in mind. So what happened in America? We saw what happened in England, United Kingdom. Now, how was it, or what was the state in America? In America, a similar movement developed amongst the white settlers on the East Coast. Traditional feminine clothes were criticized on a variety of grounds. So people were against all these things in America. Long skirts, it was said, swept the grounds and collected filth and dirt. This caused illness. So America was not better. They had long skirts with frills and all these things which swept the floor as they walked. It collected dirt and eventually it caused illness to the women. The skirts were voluminous. It was so huge and it had a lot of material and difficult to handle. Yes, you cannot walk properly. It was not comfortable. It was very difficult to handle. There are chances where you even fall if you don't have the proper practice of handling it. They hampered movement, which meant that it was a great obstacle to move from one place to another. Maybe it took a long time for a woman to walk from one place to another. Yes, even some of the wedding gowns that you have these days, it is very difficult to walk with that. Only recently they have got these dresses which are lightweight and it is very costly. But in those days, think of the weight that these gowns had. It just caused hindrance to the movement and prevented women from working and earning also. You just had to sit at home and be so beautiful, look so nice with thin waist. And of course, you cannot work and earn and move freely and do what you like. Reform of the dress, it was said, would change the position of women. So if there was some reformation in the dress, women could move freely, right? It would become a part of their identity to move freely and just earn. If clothes were comfortable and convenient, then women could work, earn their living and become independent. So, this was something which really awaited reformation and transformation because women were not allowed to move from one place to another. It's not the rules, it is just the dressing which hampered. This is one word that you have learned here, hampered the movement from one place to another. So, America was not better than UK, they also faced a lot of problems. Okay?